Good. How are you? It's nice to formally meet you.
You as well. You're joining me right from your classroom today.
Right from my classroom.
I wanted to ask, how do you pronounce your last name?
My drill sergeants loved it. Suckfiel.
Okay, so just like it looks. I wasn't entirely sure.
Or if you're my dad had a he was in the army as well, and his drill instructor, I believe, was born in Germany. They pronounced it Suckfiel.
Okay,
So and my
that's
dad's like, what? Who? My dad would be confused. Who are you talking about?
and Mark, you're joining us
Good
from
morning.
where in Pennsylvania? Is it near Pittsburgh?
Near Pittsburgh, if you've ever heard of an amusement park called Kennywood Park, it's about 12 minutes from there.
Okay, very good. So it's nice to meet you, Mark, and I'll welcome my Canadian audience. We got a couple of students joining us who are on their long weekend, and I know there's a couple of others. And everybody in the Zoom room, this is kind of a unique meeting. You can probably tell that Mark is a teacher as well, and he's actually joining us from his classroom, and he does have some students in there with him as well. So I think we're in for a little bit of a unique experience this morning, which should be kind of cool. So, students on my end, welcome to everybody, and we will go through and ask some questions. I was just telling Mark that in my classes, we are kind of getting to the beginning of the 21st century
Interviewed about
and
my
looking
experience in
at
Iraq.
the 9/11 context. And Mark, of course, is going to join the American military in that time. So, Mark, I mean, if you are ready on your end, and like I said, if you need to leave for a moment to shush your own student or to,
Reprimand my kids.
I wasn't
Sure.
going to say that, but if you do need for a moment to deal with something on your end, obviously we can just go ahead with that.
I I
And
have really good kids. If I need to, I'll just mute it and then we'll go from there. The redirection for this class typically is very quick if it needs to happen at all.
excellent. So I'm very glad to hear that. I think it's probably going to be easier for me because if I need to mute my students, I can just click on something. You might have a little more to deal with today, but I'm sure this will all be really good. So, Mark, I would love it if you could begin by just sort of introducing yourself. Maybe let the kids have a sense of where you're from and just a bit about what your life was like before the military side of it.
Oh, as you can see, my name's Mark Suckfiel. I grew up in the area in which I teach. I'm from a long line of military service that probably dates back. The longest and earliest that I could go back to is that we do have some relatives that were in the American Revolution. So something that is unique with me is, not to compare it to the movie, but I'm kind of like Lieutenant Dan minus everybody lived during Forrest Gump. So I think that it was a foregone conclusion that at some point in my life that I probably would have served. But from the time that I was a young kid, I've always wanted to be a teacher. So I chose to take that route. Yeah, I had a very, very idyllic childhood. Throughout my life, some of the things that we've done, for example, Memorial Day is coming up. So this Wednesday, my dad, I'm still lucky that he's around. He's a Vietnam veteran. My dad, my brother, I have a son. My brother has two sons. We're gonna go decorate the graves in our town that we've done every year since, my God, there's pictures of me in diapers. Okay. And so I was student teaching when 9/11 happened, and I immediately left West Mifflin Area High School, which is near here. And the strange thing about it is there are some maps that show that the plane that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, actually flew right over that high school before it went, I believe it's 50 or 60, 70 miles away and crashed into that field. Well, I went down to the recruiter's office that day to enlist, not knowing who was responsible, assuming that it was an attack. The assumption was confirmed, but all the federal buildings on that day were closed, so I couldn't enlist that day. So I went home. My mother, of course, she assumed what I was going to tell her. She said, please, can you please finish your degree? Because in our area, it's a very industry heavy town. So I would have been the first person in my immediate family to receive a college degree. So from there, I finished student teaching. I started substitute teaching in the building in which I'm a teacher now. And I enlisted in February, I left in May. Now, I was unique because initially I enlisted in the United States Army Reserves because my mom convinced me to do that because I could potentially get a teaching job, and if they needed me, then they would take me. And well, lo and behold, on November 7th, 2003, we were alerted. November 11th, we were federalized, if you want to call it that. And on December 7th, I was sent to, and here's some, I don't know if you want to call it irony, but I was sent to Fort McCoy, Wisconsin from December to February 2003, early 2004, to train to go fight in a desert environment. So that's in the infinite wisdom of the Army, they chose to send us to a place. I qualified on a machine gun in negative 35-degree weather to go fight in the desert.
Remarkable. And just to give my students a sense, what year were you born? Just so they have a rough sense of
Uh,
your age when all this was
I'm
happening.
really old. I was born in 1979.
Okay. Well, to give you a sense of age, I started high school in 1979, so you're doing just fine there. So you're honestly like a very young student teacher, just 21, 22 years old when 9/11 took
Yes.
place. One of the big things I emphasize with my students, and I'm sure it's the same with you, is just the technological change, that we've all lived through in our lifetimes. Can you tell the kids how you learned about 9/11?
I mean, I lived it. I don't know. I see what you're saying. So if you ever watch national news or I'm not sure, international news, there's a ticker at the bottom of the screen. Um, so what happened initially was we didn't know what happened. The first plane had hit the Twin Towers, and then they took everybody into what was called an LG or a LGI room, large group instruction room, and we were watching that as it went. Okay, and then I believe at 9:18 or somewhere around there, I think the second plane hit, and then the news was trickling in. And the reason why I brought up that ticker is because one of the things that happened with news is that people were trying to get news out so quickly, and that's where the ticker actually started. In my recollection, that's where the ticker started to come, where the constant news cycle began was 9/11 because people were trying to get information out so quickly that that's what happened, and it almost happened with immediacy. I believe when we were watching it, it was just constant flow of information. So we didn't really know what happened. We just knew that it happened. We didn't know who was responsible at that point, but we were learning it as we were learning as we were going.
And thank you for that. That's a point I like to make to the kids because the way they get their information now versus how we got it, approximately their age, has changed so much. So just a reminder to my students, guys, we're going to make our way through the Google Doc, and Mark, here and there, I'm going to prompt my students to pop onto the screen. So
Sure.
they can ask you those questions and anything else that they might come up with along the way. So, guys, I think we've basically looked at number 1 and 2. So I am going to ask Charlie to come on and ask number 3. So you go ahead there, Charlie.
Hello, sir. Can you describe your training experiences and locations?
Sure. Um, like I said, my basic training happened in a place called Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Uh, it's in the middle of the United States. It was in the summer. It was the humidity level was almost unbearable. Uh, it was unbelievably hot. It was basically in a forest. That's just your basic training. Now, when I went to be what was called mobilized, we trained at a place called Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. And like I said, we trained on explosives because I was a combat engineer. dealing with demolitions and explosives, excuse me. So we were learning how to create obstacles, how to breach or take apart obstacles. We were learning how to dismantle live anti-tank mines. We had no When it comes to Iraq, we didn't really know what our mission was going to be. We were just preparing for what our job was. It's called an MOS, a military occupation specialty. So what our job was when we went there, we had no idea that we, instead of blowing up or not blowing up, instead of taking out targets or instead of dismantling bombs, we had no idea that eventually we were going to fight infantry. We did practice a little bit or train on small unit tactics or infantry tactics, but to be honest with you, at the time it was subpar for what we were eventually going to do. So did I answer your question?
I think that was great, and I'll ask another one when you come in. And a reminder for students and everybody, a couple of you came in a moment late. Mark is a teacher himself, and he's in his classroom with students, so he may need to break away a little bit here and there.
Middle school kids going to lunch. It's
Okay,
quite chaotic.
I have been there myself. I
Yeah,
understand. Let me ask a follow-up to that, Mark.
sure.
And I know you're with students, so adjust your answers as you need to here and there. I'm wondering how you adapted to life in the army. I mean, that's a dramatic change to go, well, I think it's a dramatic change to go from being a teacher to a soldier, a different sense of discipline and all that. How did you adapt?
I think it was for me, I was 22 years old, so it was relatively easy. And the difference between there were 17-year-olds with me in basic training. So they would do something that was called a split op. So they would do basic training one summer, and then after their senior year, they would go to their specialty training. For me, I think it was relatively easy. I think college helped me out. I think just knowing what I was getting myself into definitely helped me because to be truthful with you, basic training was the easiest, and in some ways, even being overseas was some of the easiest times of my life. Basic training, they told you when to get up, they told you when to go to the bathroom, they told you when to eat, they told you where you're going, they told you when you're going, they told you everything you had to do. So if you can do that, oh my God, it was easy. I tell my children that, and they just laugh. And I said, no, it really was easy. You just do what you're supposed to do. And that's life. If you just, listen to your boss, if you train, if you want to make yourself better, it's relatively easy. You're gonna have challenges. Of course, you're gonna have challenges, physical, mental, emotional, but it definitely was some of the easiest times of my life.
And one other follow-up question I had, and students, a reminder to please have your chat on. So if you do want to communicate with me or send me a note, you can do that. And obviously get notes potentially from me. I'm curious about the conversations that you might have had with the other young recruits. I imagine a lot of you guys were talking about 9/11. There were probably
Mhm.
some feelings of vengeance and that kind of thing that other recruits were feeling. Did a lot of
Sure.
the other young women and men join up for reasons similar to you?
Yeah, I would say I joked around and I would call all of us 9/11 babies because, we were a product or a byproduct of the events that occurred that day. And most of us did join as a result of that. Now that was an odd time period and politically, and this could be down the road. What was strange about 9/11 is it wasn't a country that attacked us. It it wasn't, some people believe so, but it wasn't a religion that attacked us. It was terrorists from various countries and various organizations throughout the world. So yeah, we wanted vengeance, but you know, the younger people felt that maybe it was countries that did this, and there probably, and looking back, there may have been countries that supported monetarily or maybe the ideology that they had, but there was no specific thing to attack or to take out, if you will.
Okay, and let me follow up one more time, and we'll go to a student in just a second on this. But obviously, you know, you're going to end up seeing combat in Iraq, but in the very early going after 9/11, the real focus was on Afghanistan. And
Correct.
in the past week or two, we've had a number of Canadian officers speak at the school who served in Afghanistan in different contexts. And a few of the students who are here today heard those officers. Did you
Mhm.
want to go to Afghanistan? You know, how did you feel when you found out you were on your way to Iraq? Was there any kind of feelings there?
I was shocked initially that we were going to Iraq because I thought that Afghanistan would have been the place that we would have went. However, so when you're a reservist, you get attached to certain units. And one of the red flags that we weren't going to go to Afghanistan is I was in the 1st Cavalry Division, which it's right here. And in Vietnam, it was an air mobile unit. And that changed where it became a mechanized infantry slash armor type thing. So obviously tanks in Afghanistan and the equipment that we had in the 1st Cavalry Division, who I'd eventually be attached to, that wouldn't go very well in Afghanistan because of the terrain and the mountains. And so although there were tanks there and there were other armored vehicles, but as a whole, to move a mechanized unit there, it just tactically it wouldn't make sense.
Curious about that, and we'll talk about those questions of motivations and everything. There's, you know, obviously some real complexities in terms of the wars that we're looking at here, and you've touched on some of that. My student Elena is going to ask a question. Now, she mentioned she's having a little bit of Wi-Fi issues, so we'll see how that goes. But Elena, try number 4, please.
Hi, what was the process to go overseas?
The process to go overseas. So as an Army reservist, we had a base that was local to Pittsburgh. So they took us as a unit. And the odd thing about that is that we didn't have enough soldiers in our unit at the time. So what they did is they did something called an involuntary transfer. And what I do like about that is I have friends from Utah, Washington, California. They were taking people from other reserve units, and we were morphed into one body. And they were from all over the country. So they took us, they sent them here. We had to do some pre-mobilization tasks, combat life saving, basically you're not a medic. I don't want to insult medics, but it was just things medically that we could do, the average soldier could do to extend the possibility of saving a life if wounded on the battlefield. Uh, so we started here. We loaded up all of our equipment. They put us on tour buses, for lack of a better word. We drove 11 hours to Wisconsin, and that's where we did our pre-mobilization tasks. We qualified on various weapon systems. Believe it or not, everybody that that's eligible, you have to have a license to drive a Humvee. So we had to license people on vehicles. And again, we didn't know what our mission was. We had no idea what our mission was once we got into theater, once we got into Iraq. We had the PT, you had to pass your PT test. So when we're there, and once your unit goes through their checklist, then you're going to be good to go. And you go from your mobilization site, and we flew into Ali Al Salam Air Force Base into Kuwait. And I was living in a place called Camp Victory South. And once again, we went there, we qualified on our weapons. We did what's called convoy training because that was a big thing in Iraq. We worked on our convoy training, and then from there, some people convoyed north. I, for whatever reason, was selected to fly north, and then we flew north or convoyed north, and we ended up in Biop, it was called, or Camp Victory North in Baghdad, Iraq, which was on the grounds of Saddam Hussein, who was the leader of Iraq, his hunting ground.
And just a reminder, Mark, you did send me that set of slides. So if there's a
Yes.
particular image you want me to bring up, I can do that to match what you're talking about. One more question I got to ask here, and I had mentioned to you, Mark, that my own classes are,
Mhm.
basically finishing up the year at about the year 2000 or so. So, you're getting into a little bit of stuff we haven't talked about so much, but I vividly remember, and I'm sure the adults in the room remember, I can see a few of them out there joining us from different places. We all remember what a huge debate there was about the United States going into Iraq. And of course, there was a lot of information emerged that about, how truthful, perhaps the government was being in its ambitions to go after Saddam Hussein. And I don't remember the exact timeline. Was that information coming out before you guys went to Iraq? Like, were you hearing these arguments?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were arguments. There are, I guess there are two types of war. There are wars of necessity and wars of choice. And this one initially, in my opinion, and everybody can have their own opinion. I'm so middle of the road. I'll listen to anybody's debate, anybody's talk. I'll listen to anybody. Okay. We can talk about it. We can shake hands and hug after. I'm not going to hate any, you know what I mean? So I'm very open minded. So yes, there was information that some of this Colin Powell, if you recall, was in front of the UN and he said that I forget what it was. I don't know if it was anthrax or he had a vial of something, and he said this is enough to XYZ to kill or maim or whatever XYZ amount of people. Um, so with a war of choice, if you want to call it that, and they knew we were coming. So was some of the weapons of mass destruction material, did it leave Iraq? Was it buried in the desert, which was rumored? Was it there in the first place? That I don't know, but there was talks amongst the troops about that. But the odd thing about it is when you're doing a job and you're in that situation, and we could get to this later, there are no politics. At the end of the day, if you're the boots on the ground, I'm fighting for the soldier next to me. He or she is fighting for me, and that's the end of it. The ultimate goal is to come home. Whatever the politicians decide to do, that's what they decide to do. We chose to enlist. Now, in retrospect, I don't know if there are any good wars because of the amount of youth and the people that killed and disabled and and other issues that may rise from it. It's the average person that's living in those countries, whether it's here getting attacked on 9/11 or going to Iraq, the Iraqi civilians, they're the ones that suffer probably most.
And I'll bring up some of your photos in a moment because I think a few of them really illustrate what you're talking about. My student Colby sent me a message in the chat, and Colby, I just want to be sure that you see the message I sent back to you because I think that's a good question. So, Colby, if you could go ahead and ask that.
Hi. Did you serve with any female soldiers?
I'm so with any
Female soldiers?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and it's a very good question. So in my reserve unit, the female soldiers that were there were primarily medics. So were we, I guess, gender mixed? Yeah, my reserve unit. But when I went and we got shipped, which we'll get into, to an active duty unit, which was something that was not expected. When we went there, there were no female soldiers except for the doctors that were on post and that were in the field hospitals. So they weren't fighting beside me. However, on the pad that I lived in, because we called them pads, and there's a picture somewhere in my slide, I forget which slide, but in the slideshow, but the MPs were fully integrated. But combat engineers at that point or not? But that's a very good question. In saying that, I'm of the opinion that female soldiers fought just as bravely as male soldiers, and they still don't get enough credit. But I think that that's correcting itself. The actions of a female soldier on the battlefield, I think, is correcting the false opinion that they're not as brave as men or mentally as strong as men.
Thank you for that, and a good pickup there, Colby. That's a big issue that the students have obviously seen in their own lifetimes, and I think the war in Iraq is where that transition in many ways takes place. So, Mark, let me go ahead and open up your set of slides. I'll do a share
Sure.
screen here just so we can have you talk about a few of these issues. So, you mentioned to begin, what did you want to say about the insignia the students are looking at here?
Okay, the insignia on the left. Okay, that's Alpha Company 91st Engineer Battalion. And the one thing I like about that and is that acts, not words. Particularly your age, kids. Okay. Your actions do speak louder than words. It doesn't take much effort to be kind. It doesn't take much effort to be nice. Open a door, pick up a piece of garbage. I'm not lecturing. I don't mean to lecture you kids, but I like that. That can apply to the battlefield as well. Acts, not words. You don't, there are many definitions of bravery, valor, and I like that. So that was the battalion I was in. Now, from a battalion, many battalions make up a brigade. Okay, and it could be 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, in the middle, I was part of the Blackjack Brigade, the Second Brigade Combat Team, and a bunch of brigade combat teams turn into a division which is on the right, and that'll be the First Cavalry Division out of. And now it's called Fort Cavazos, but it was Fort Hood, Texas at the time.
And let me go on to the next. So this is you guys over in Iraq, I take it.
Yeah, that'll be my platoon, and the unique thing about that platoon, and I think that it's addressed in later slides, is everybody you see in that platoon is an Army reservist. So what happens is in April of 2004, essentially a civil war was occurring in Baghdad between the various sects of um of Islam, the Sunnis and Shias, and there was a caught in between of that were in between it that was American soldiers that we really didn't know what was going on. So the 91st Engineer Battalion, which I get sent to, and we got sent to as a result of the amount of casualties that they were taking fighting in the streets of Western Baghdad. So they were taking so many casualties, they needed other soldiers to replace or to help them because they were tired, they were beat up, they were injured. So they took us, which initially was 25, and they sent us to down to Camp Blackjack, it was called, and we were fully integrated with that unit. If you've ever seen any war movie, and there's always an issue with replacements because they're not what's called organic. They're not originally with that unit. So we were that replacements. In particular, Band of Brothers has a wonderful episode based on that. The Pacific has a wonderful episode based on that. We're lucky in a way, and I don't mean to use the word lucky, but it's the best word for it, that occurred and we went down there early in the deployment because then we can mesh with them for a longer time period because we were there from April until February of 05 when we left. So we were lucky in that regard.
And let me ask, and students, I'm just to give you a sense of where I am in the question sheet. I'm kind of looking at number 6 here, just paraphrasing a little bit. Can you explain to my students and to your students for that matter, what was your mission as it was explained to you? Because, you know, you had mentioned you went over to Iraq with kind of one mission in mind, and then you found out your frontline infantry. That's got to be kind of a shock. And I think
So
in the email you sent to me, Mark, you had this great phrase where you talked about being a teacher, and then a few months later, you're all of a sudden doing street fighting in Baghdad.
yeah, in a matter of 90 to 120 days, I went from sitting in a room 200 feet from me to kicking doors down in Baghdad. When we first got sent there, we didn't have a mission. You know what we did? We built horseshoe pits, and we built. They're like concrete pads we were building for maintenance vehicles. Other than that, we had no idea. We didn't have any idea until they called us in front of a formation, and there were 25 names, and mine was one of them. And they said, "Oh, by the way, you are no longer going to be here for the time being. You're going to be sent to Camp Blackjack, and you're going to be with the 91st."
Alex, if you could ask number 6, please, as it is on the sheet.
Sure. I would like to ask, what were your day-to-day activities during these operations? What was
Sure.
the most exciting or
Sure.
boring?
Well, I'll go with your last part first. Um, movies really cannot and do not convey how boring war really is. War is eternally boring, with the exception of when there are when you're engaged in combat, the enemy's engaging you, or you're engaging the enemy. So a typical day was we were lucky because, and it's on the slideshow. We were lucky that we had some creature comforts. We had the internet. We lived in trailers with air conditioning if it was working. I used to laugh when the guys would complain that the air conditioning wasn't working, and I'm like, our dads fought in the jungles, and our grandparents either fought in the jungle or froze at the bulge or stormed the beaches. I said, "You're really modern warfare, and the amenities were amazing." I mean, uh, but so there were typically what you did is you had a set time that you had to go on a patrol. So we had 4 platoons. One of the platoons every day, or actually they gave us a week, was what was called Mike One, which was maintenance. And what we liked them and loved about that was you weren't out there. Okay. And again, we have this false macho notion that, oh, I want to go out there, the enemy, let's go get the enemy. But you know what? That week off, and they did it, I believe, on purpose to give you a downtime. And we started to understand the mind a little bit more, and the human experience a little bit more, that week off was like relaxation. But other than that, you were either QRF, which is a quick reaction force. If one of our platoons was out and they were attacked and they needed help, we had to be ready to go in an instant. Get out there, let's go. Rescue's probably the wrong word, but if they needed rescue or assistance in a firefight, you went. Then you had 2 platoons at a time that were doing patrolling. There were 2 types of patrols that typically were done. You had mounted patrols, which is you would sit in a vehicle for hours and just drive around. Okay. And while you're doing that, you were probably on a mission that was called a hunter killer mission. A hunter killer mission is you drove around until you got shot at. And then you would try to draw out the enemy. Now you're in an up armored vehicle. So if you're being shot at, the bullets more than likely aren't going to penetrate the vehicle. You're relatively safe. However, if you're on a mounted patrol and you're driving, there's a potential that you could run into an IED, and that's also going to be in a slideshow in the pictures. And they were basically artillery rounds that they had, and they would either command detonate, which means that they saw you, and they would pull. Thank you. Quick reaction force is what QRF is, and they would set the bomb off manually, or they would have it timed. So those are just some of the things. Then we had dismounted patrols. A dismounted patrol is you are outside of the vehicle and you're walking around. Me personally, I prefer the dismounted patrol because if things went crazy, you had a better chance of finding cover and concealment. Whereas if you are in a large Humvee, you do not. Now, cover means that you're behind something. Concealment just means that you're hidden and they can't see you. So we had that. Then we had raids. There were two types of raids that we did. You had a dynamic entry raid, which they didn't know you were coming. So you would have to breach the door, whether you used an explosive of some type, or most of the time it was a big steel beam and we would knock the door in. Or you would have a cordon and search where you literally would go to the door, knock on the door, and say, "Hey, we have intelligence saying that you were a terrorist." And most of the time they let you in okay, and it was fine. If they didn't, that's another story. You had to segregate the men and the women, you had to segregate everybody, and then you search the house. Okay, and that there's also a picture of that on the slideshow that we'll talk about a little bit later. But we provided overwatch for convoys, which means that we would take a house, go to the roof, and we would watch what are called the MSRs, which are your main supply routes. Because what would happen is, picture a highway, the terrorists would put bombs, they would bury bombs, and we would have to get supplies from Kuwait to the various American bases or allied bases throughout Iraq. And we had to make sure that those were clear so that people could get medical supplies. And that wasn't only for our troops, it was also to help the Iraqi civilians, to maybe get them food, get them medical supplies. So that was just to keep the country running, for lack of a better word. So we would provide overwatch, and that's pretty much the missions that we had. I mean, we had beds, we had air conditionings, we had DVD players, we had music, we had a chow hall, which would be like a restaurant. You could go anytime to go get food. So, like I said, I called it a garrison war. A garrison war is when you're fighting from a base, which they call a garrison, and you're going out and then you return. It's not like during World War II, where if you fought, everything behind you was safe. The only safe part there would have been our base, where in World War II, the more land you took, the safer you were.
And related to what you just said, I'm going to open up your pictures again in a moment.
Sure.
You talked about being, given missions, you're looking for specific individuals. I happen to have a deck of the Iraqi playing cards in my classroom, and I was showing them to the students the other day. Did you guys use those? Like, were you looking for some of those
We
top?
did. We did. I can't remember specifically who some of them were. Obviously Saddam Hussein, but he ended up getting captured early in our deployment. But uh, there were rumors that his sons, Uday and Kusay, were in our sector. There was eventually this guy's gonna, I believe he's dead now, but he's supposedly one of the fathers of ISIS. Al-Zarqawi was his name. He was in our sector. We were constantly looking for him. So they knew that he eventually would be who he did become, but we just never found him.
Okay, and let me do
But
shares.
yeah, we used to laugh at the cards.
Okay, so tell the students the significance of these two photos.
Okay, I wanted to show that because I for years I've seen, and it goes back to World War One, I've seen a cross section of, if you want to call it that, of pictures. So on the left, on your left, with the guide on, it says 91A behind it. That was early in the deployment. And on the right is like mid deployment. I just wanted to really look at that because I look young and fresh on the left, and on the right I look like a used catcher's mitt. Like I look pretty beat up my face. And now whether that's sun or stress, I'd imagine that was stress. But you could see that I'm fully gray now, and that really started to happen. And let's see, I come home in March of 05. Yeah, March of 05, the grayness really started to speed up, and it really sped up October 1st, 2013, when I had twins. Well, my wife had twins, but
And let me go on to the next.
sure. This is the Iraq and Iran war. So this war is going to occur from 1981 to 1988. and this is the parade ground. If you're familiar with World War II and Nazi Germany, and they had the Nuremberg parade grounds, that is essentially what that is. If you go and you could YouTube Saddam Hussein parades, and he's always carrying a rifle and he shoots one off, and there's a stand, that's where that was. And I'm a byproduct, I guess, in some ways, of the information during the first Gulf War, which is when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And I remember seeing that as a kid. And when you're standing there and you're seeing things that you saw on TV, it was just unbelievable. And the length and the size of that, unless you're standing there, you can't appreciate it. So all that's connected to the Iraqi, I believe in Canada, yours is in Ottawa, but but that's also the Iraqi Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
And I want to draw students' attention to the fact that the photo has a digital signature. We wouldn't see those on the photos of the Vietnam and World War II vets. I take it, Mark, you had your own digital camera. Were you guys allowed to take photos?
That's a great question. We were not only allowed, we were encouraged. And I found out later that one of the reasons why we were encouraged, and even if something catastrophic happened, I'll just leave it at that. We were encouraged to take pictures. And part of the reason is a lot of the pictures, in the event that something terrible would happen, we've had the FBI and other governmental organizations over there with us. So they were able to find things, bomb makers and other things. They had the technology to take a picture, from what I understand of that. So this picture, if you look, the Iranian Iraqi war, it was an awful war. Chemical warfare was used, and eventually people were looking for jobs, and we were trying to prop up the Iraqi home army, we'll call it. So people would come and they would enlist in the new Iraqi army, and we actually helped train some of the guys from Iraq that fought in this war, and it was horrific. They said it was almost, all wars horrific, but it was almost on the level of World War I, they were telling us. But what you see in the lower left here, and it looks like a net, is that you can see an American soldier standing there. But if you look in the lower left, those are all helmets of dead Iranian soldiers. So that's our living situation that we were talking about, all the little white things. This was on a hill called Como Hill. So if you look at the two large tents that are in the foreground, that was actually like I'm not sure what the equivalent would be in Canada, but a Walmart. So it was a huge PX. Anything you wanted, you could get, with the exception of alcohol. We were not allowed to consume alcohol over there. Other countries were, however. And the little white things in the background, those were the trailers we lived at. That's actually, if you look straight ahead, that's actually our pad. We called it. It was pad 16, and that's where I lived for, well, for a year or so.
And this, I take it, is sort of your operational map in Baghdad?
It is. It is. I found this online. I had one that I obtained. We'll just leave it at that. And I can't find it. It's got to be in my attic somewhere. But so the Khatamia, Mansour, and Rashid, if you go from the bottom to the left, those are all places that we patrolled, and we eventually had to take over an area north of that was called Ashula, or if you're from the west, Shula, Shulla. So those were the regions that we patrolled. And if you look on the left here in the lower left, that is BIOP, that's Baghdad International Airport. You could see the runways, and that's where we operated out of. Just, it was all a big complex called BIOP, and it was broken up into various camps, but that's where we came out of.
Okay, and is this a photograph of kind of those same areas?
That is a photograph, very similar region of that. I believe this is Mansour. If you could see in the smog, that's actually pollution. If you look at the smog, that's called the Moab Mosque. It was supposed to be one of the largest mosques in the world that they're building. You could look it up now, and they did finish it. It's absolutely beautiful and stunning. This was actually taken from a Black Hawk helicopter. And yeah, that was the area that we were patrolling. And if you take a look at that, they were called Mahalas. Their neighborhoods are called Mahalas, and it was very, very densely populated. In some ways, some of the buildings were they were all connected, and it was a city block essentially, and it was huge. And you could, if you looked at that picture, you could kind of pick up on that,
And
and you could see a smaller mosque up there with a minaret.
and you alluded to this a couple of times, Mark, but I mean, looking at an image like this really makes it clear. What kind of climate were you dealing with, temperatures and so forth?
You know, when they say that there's a difference between dry heat and humidity heat, there isn't. I mean, I think the highest in direct sunlight, it was probably about 127. And it would get chilly at night, but it was very dry, arid. When it rained, it rained. But there is a funny story that I have. On Christmas Eve in 2004. There were actually snow flurries, which it definitely made it feel great, made it feel like I was at home. It was I'll never forget that as long as I live. But
And
it flurried a little bit.
And I gotta do a quick conversion for my students. As you know, Mark, we use Celsius up here. 127 degrees
Oh,
Fahrenheit, guys.
sorry.
That's about 50 degrees Celsius. Okay, so you know the hottest we're gonna get in Toronto is probably low 30s in the summer on average. 50 degrees. That is pretty dramatic. And look at what Mark and fellow soldiers are wearing. How did it feel to be wearing that much equipment, doing patrols in 50 degrees?
I probably should have had a picture of the combat load. So we were probably wearing, I'm guessing, 50 pounds of extra gear. We had what was called an OTV. I believe it stands for, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know. I think it's outer tactical vest, but it was bulletproof and it had what called SAPI plates. I have no idea what SAPI means, but they were thick. They weren't steel. They were, oh my gosh, ceramic plates, so it could stop a high-powered rifle if it hit you in your chest or your back. So you had that to deal with. My uniform by the end of my tour, because I had a lucky uniform, I still have it. It was white because of the sweat and the water and the sun baking it. It actually, they used to laugh at me and say that I should be fighting in the mountains in the Himalayas or something because it was white. But that would be that the picture you see there, that's actually a very good picture. That supposedly, and again, as a historian, supposedly that was one of the ancient gates of Baghdad. Obviously, it's not from thousands of years ago, but that's supposed to be one of the eight, I believe there were eight of them, entrances to ancient Baghdad that you see with a gold dome on it. But again, it's being a social studies teacher. Unfortunate how I got there. I understand why I had to go there, and I'm not questioning why I was there, but it was pretty neat to be in the cradle of civilization.
And is that you in that photo, or did you take the photo here,
That
Mark?
is not. I took the picture.
Okay. And this next one, what's the significance of this image?
I just wanted to show the kids and show really the world that they would use corners, and I'm not making any judgment on the people, but we have it pretty good here in the West, and I think sometimes we complain, and sometimes I think that we have the right to complain, we have the right to voice our opinion, but in much of the West, we're not living in conditions like this. And part of the reason why they were living in conditions like this is there was such a disparity in what people deemed what success was, that there were parts that were just forgotten in Baghdad under Saddam Hussein. And you could see here that this would be the garbage collection point, if you will. And some of the stuff that they did, they would burn it. And you know so we have it pretty lucky here in the West for the most part. And you know is equality where it should be 100%? Probably not. But, 100%, probably not, 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 but, 100% but we tend to, and we probably could choose our own path. In a lot of cases, in places in the Middle East and in third world countries, that's not the case. And I just think that we're pretty lucky in the situations we're in.
And this is you before a raid. What were you guys talking about here?
That's during a raid. And so this guy, there were 4 people in there. And we're looking, I think we're looking at something and we have no idea what it says. We're just looking for maps. And so he was a bomb maker. Um, if the building is secure outside, then immediately we took our OTVs off to get cool. So we had security outside, we had security on the roof, we had so to break it down and and you had to look through the people's belongings to see if there was intelligence. So that's what we're doing. That guy on the left there, I wear him on my right wrist. His name was Clarence Adams. About a month after this, he ended up getting killed on September 7th, 2004. And he was just a great soldier, great human being. He had 6 children, and he just was one of the best soldiers I had the pleasure to be around. And he was just a great human being, and he kept us loose. We called him the Riddler because he would tell us riddles. You'd be on a patrol, and you'd be thinking about it. You'd be like, wait a minute, what? He was just a super guy, smart, great soldier.
And I'm assuming that you guys would have done a lot of your raids at night. Can you give the kids a sense of what it was like using the night vision goggles and so forth?
Absolutely. So there were 2 types. You had something called a monocle, which is it's one eye, and then you had the old ones, which were the bifocal, for lack of a better word. Some of the stuff I should know the name. But it was unique. A lot of the raids were at night. Some of them were during the day. The ones during the day tended to be that cordon and knock, where you would knock on the door and say, "Hey, you know, we heard you're a terrorist." So what happened was over there, not to get sidetracked, but over there when we were conducting raids and intelligence, there were a lot of times that if your neighbor hated you, you're a terrorist. They would find the Americans, and that's when you tended to gather intelligence. And if the intelligence wasn't sufficient enough, then you would knock on the door. And most of the time, in my experience, if I recall correctly, they were former officers of the Iraqi army. So, but the nighttime raids were crazy because typically what would happen is you didn't drive up to the house, you walked up to the house. When you walk up to the house, it gave a better element of surprise, and that was probably no, I mean, not probably. That was pretty scary, particularly if you're the point man or the breacher man. The breacher man is the guy that breaks the door down. The point man goes in first. So yeah, and then you had to clear, like I said, a lot of the houses, I mean, room after room after room after room after room, and you're clearing it and you're clearing it. And at night it's quite scary. And I never liked night vision goggles. I don't know why. It's kind of like I hate using my rear view mirror. I would rather look while I'm doing it than use my rear view mirror. It's not that I didn't feel safe, and I did trust the night vision, but yeah, it was a unique experience to get used to.
But I wanted to put that image up there for the students to see, very customary image for the older people in the room who lived through this. But I, talk so much in history about technology, Mark, and how it's changed militarily and otherwise. This is the kind of image we would have seen on the media. I mean, is this really what it looked like for you when you're looking through these goggles?
Absolutely, that's about as accurate as it could get. Um, the thing, if you see, I believe it's probably a flashlight on the end of his rifle. Now, if you notice here, you could see that the soldiers that's called stacked on the door that are going through. If you notice, nobody here has their night vision goggles on, because if you would use that flashlight and your night vision goggles were on, that brightness would temporarily disable you, for lack of a better word. Like the brightness would be like, whoa. So you had to be very, very disciplined with that. So what happened a lot is we had lasers. We had lasers to target the enemy or who, whatever we were going in at. So the lasers made it easier, but the flashlight, it would have temporarily blinded you. When I mean temporarily, it was not long.
Yeah, but in a firefight, certainly a few seconds of not being able to see is definitely a problem. My student Chris wanted to ask a question. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, sir. I'm just wondering,
Hi,
do you
Chris.
remember like your first time under fire?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was actually, I remember we just left the gate. We were going down a place called Route Force. And that's anytime we turned on the Cardinals and then Route Force. But anytime that occurs, it's like a flashbulb moment. That's when you realize, wow, people are really, really trying to kill me. And it's like, whoa, okay. And initially, a lot of the times I was inside the vehicle in that particular case. But, if you're engaged in a firefight initially, we all like to think that we would react immediately. But again, in the back of your mind, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, this is real. And that's a real moment of clarity that you're in it. This is real. This is happening. Let's try to keep each other alive.
And with that, let me go back to your slides here. Let me just go ahead and open that up again. There's a few others that I wanted to see if we could get you to speak to, because these really are pretty incredible images. So what about this one, Mark?
Okay, that's called a Bradley fighting vehicle. And the unique thing about that Bradley fighting vehicle, again, in the reserves, we didn't have them. So we ended up getting them, I forget, I want to say May or June 2004. They ended up getting sent to the 91st, the unit that we ended up being fully integrated with. And they're like, okay, you're an NCO, you're a sergeant. You might have to be a Bradley commander. And I'm like, what? Like I never went to gunnery school. So luckily that didn't happen much. But I mean, just imagine you have 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, because they are kids. I mean, I was 24, and that age gap there that are in charge, not in charge, but are driving these vehicles, that are gunners on these vehicles, and the incredible things that they were able to do. And again, I cannot stress enough about the bravery and the competency of young kids that are put in these situations that they just incredible. But so that vehicle is awesome because it had what was called reactive armor on it. If you look on the side, okay, there's sheets of, I believe it was C4. So if a RPG hits that, it creates an explosion which kind of expels the explosion away from you. The physics of it are amazing. So that I felt very, 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 very safe being in that vehicle.
Okay. And sorry, I'm just chatting with some of the students as we're going along here. These next few images are pretty remarkable. And students, I should point out an RPG, rocket propelled grenade. I'm sure a lot of the students know the acronyms from video games, quite possibly. But if military talk students, you should know there's lots of initials and acronyms. So if Mark says a phrase you're unfamiliar with, just go ahead and ask. Now, these next few images, Mark, are pretty remarkable. What are the things we're looking at in these ones?
Okay, what you see on the right, or we'll go left to right. Those are just anti-personnel grenades that you see. I'm not sure the name of them, but what you could see, the two in the center are rockets. The black, I forget the temporary name of it, but the rocket goes inside the black weapon. The black weapon fires. That's the whole mechanism, and that's the whole machine of the RPG. The unique thing about that, I was in a vehicle with an RPG, and I was gunning, and like you could feel it. It came so close that I believe that I felt like the heat from the vapor from the. So hey, listen, if that guy was a little bit better, or the propellant was a little bit better, I might not be here. But and on the right, you see an AK-47, which is common if anybody has played any, like you said, Mr. Masters, if anybody, any of the kids played video games, they're probably very familiar with the AK-47.
And what about this one?
So initially, and very, very naively, you go places and maybe we thought that the enemy wasn't very intelligent. Maybe we thought that they weren't very sophisticated. All mistakes. So very intelligent people that were involved in this. If you take a look at that, that would be something that could be a form or contribute to in parts and components that could contribute to the IED or the improvised explosive device. So that could be something that would be command detonated. I remember you were talking about night vision. I remember being in the passenger seat and I had MVGs on, and I remember looking out of the vehicle and a light lit up, and you kids won't remember this, but back when cell phones were a little bit thicker, when you called it, it lit up. So somebody called that and it was wired to some device and it blew up. So they would use components of computers, they would use components of anything electrical, and they figured out how to tap it into a cell phone and use explosive devices.
And I take it these are some of the items that you guys recovered in your different operations.
Yes. Okay. So in the different operations, typically what would happen is, these are all the things that they could use as the improvised explosive devices. Most of them were buried in the ground. Some of them were what were called VBIEDs, and that was vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. Now, what made the VBIED so dangerous was that was command detonated 99% of the time. I'm making that number up. I don't know the exact number, but based on experience, 99% of the time, that was the weapon used was a car, and it was driven by a suicide bomber. So it's not. I've once heard it said that the original smart bomb was a car bomb. I've heard that said because they could control where they're going. They could control. Now this was the first. If I'm not mistaken, this might be one of the first VBIEDs that was in Baghdad. So this one, nobody was inside. It was command detonated, but there was a cafe in the background of that picture, and there was a politician that was helping, working with the Americans to try to improve and make Baghdad, or for the betterment of Baghdad. And I believe, I don't know if he was killed there, but I believe that he was the target. And that one we were on the base and we heard it. So that was a pretty impressive bomb. So this was a vehicle I was not in this vehicle, but everybody in that vehicle survived. And the reason why I wanted to show this one is because the capabilities of the military, whether it be Canada or the United States, um, to keep their fighting men and women safe. I mean, it's very impressive that the people in that vehicle survive. And if you look, that was from an IED. I believe they rode over it. And they used to do something called daisy chain. And a daisy chain is you have multiple IEDs and they're connected together. So when one goes off, it'll boom, 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 boom. So they could take out the whole convoy. And we were involved in many of them. And thankfully, in the ones we were involved in, there were no major injuries or deaths.
And these images here you have of the bomb techs, are these ones that you took
Yes.
yourself?
I did not partake in them individually. So what we would do is, if you've ever seen the movie Hurt Locker, most of it is grossly exaggerated. You wouldn't go out on your own. That was another mission that we had. So if there was an IED that was found, you had to do one of two things. And you'll see it on the next slide. You had to interrogate it to make sure what it was. Interrogation means that you just checked it out. That's a fancy word. I think we wanted to make ourselves sound more important than what we were. But you had to check it out to see what it was. And if it checked out that it was an IED, you called up to what was called the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center. They contacted EOD. Somebody brought out EOD, escorted, and then, the bomb suit. Or you could see here that I tried to make it better, but it kind of distorted the picture. But you could see the robot there. And what that did is that had a claw on it, and it would potentially take out the blasting cap, which is, you can't have an explosion without a blasting cap. That's what sets off the device. So it would pull that out. Then we would take the device, we would take what was going to be the bomb, we would put it in the truck, or they would blow it right there. They would put C4 on it and blow it up, which was kind of neat.
So first the robot and then the technician, I guess, depending on the
Yeah, I
circumstance.
probably should have put that in the other order.
Okay, no worries. And very familiar sight.
Yeah, you were talking about technology, and what's great about the technology that we have, it's a fully integrated battlefield. Whereas we could have communicated with the helicopters that were providing what's called Overwatch. Overwatch is exactly what it sounds like. They're watching us. Um, and they have Hellfire missiles, and they had other weapon systems on there, which was amazing. I actually, when I come home, military recruiters come to our school. I'm not sure if they do that in Canada, and they needed Apache pilots, and I would have been gone an additional year, and I said, that's all right. But it would have been neat to say I flew Apaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my students wanted to ask a question here, and I have two students named Ryan in the room. So this is grade 11, Ryan, who is going to come on. And Ryan, if you could go ahead and ask number 5.
Hi, sir. I just want to know, did you have any opportunity to interact with local civilian populations?
Every day, I can tell you this. I have a deep respect and, dare I say, love for the people of Baghdad, because I believe that no matter what conflict you're in, or no matter what country or what situation you're in the world, I believe that people just simply want to live their life. They were wonderful. I've met people over there that spoke 6 different languages. He was an engineer. I believe he spoke Italian, German, French, Arabic, obviously, English, Farsi. Brilliant guy. Brilliant. Absolute brilliant. I've met people that just wanted to keep their kids safe. Okay. And you could see in the picture, the previous picture, there's this notion that soldiers from all countries are bloodthirsty, and, yeah, I believe that on some level we're all tough, right? But I mean, look at these two probably weren't much older than the two kids that they're doing the teeter-totter seesaw with, right? So we had that. And the kids just were so happy to see us in a lot of cases. Now, don't get me wrong, there were people that were unhappy that we were there. And I always tell people this when they talk about, or they ask me how are the people there. I forget the population of Baghdad. If they were all bad, I'd be dead. No American would have left that city. And just dealing with them. And then you could see we would go visit schools, and just talking to the teachers. And Mr. Masters, it was funny because when we would talk to the older kids teachers, they deal like I said earlier, same problems as every teenagers are teenagers. We could go build a time machine and go back to Greek and Roman times. Teenagers are teenagers. But yeah, they just most people just want to live their life. You know, most of the world, whether forget about listening to the news and everything else, most of the world is good. Most of the people in the world are good. So the people that I dealt with were amazing people. I can't tell you how many meals we ate there. Nothing beats a street pita in Baghdad. Nothing.
That's a good lesson for the kids, and just some remarkable images to see. Let me ask a question, and it's on the sheet I had sent you as well there, Mark. Obviously, my students know, just to remind them, major changes in terms of who's involved in fighting in Afghanistan. I mentioned Canada was in Afghanistan, UN force. Iraq is quite a different scenario, but the Americans did have some allied nations fighting with them. Did you interact with soldiers from other countries to any degree?
We did. The strange thing about it, and I'm not sure how it broke down this way, but most of the people that we interacted with, and my brother was there too. A lot of it was what the Eastern Bloc was, kids. I don't know if you got that far, but Lithuanians, specifically Estonian. My brother, who was North, was with Albanians. Um, but the and again, our cousins, right? We're all cousins. Australia, they were craziest people. We're in the middle of an action, and they're taking pot shots at us. Mini firefight, I guess you could say. Things are exploding, and this Australian captain comes out, no vest, no helmet, and he looks at us and he goes, "Hey, I what's the sketch, mate?" And I'm like, I did ask him, "What does that mean?" He goes, "What's going on here?" And I'm like, "You might want to get behind this vehicle. That's what's going on." But they were Australians. We did see the UK, some of the UK, but yeah, they were a lot of the countries. Poland, just couldn't believe it. It was a lot of Eastern Bloc countries, and I really never looked up why. But there were 3 Estonian soldiers that lived next to our base that sadly they were killed. They were killed in action, which that one I often wondered, what did the people of Estonia think? I mean, I get the United States being there, but what would the people of Estonia think when their sons were killed in Iraq? But that's a deeper question for another time, I guess.
And it definitely goes towards the complex nature of military alliances, and the
Right.
students have seen a lot of that. Let me bring your slides back up here because you've got some other really good images in and around Baghdad. So why did you take this shot?
That shot, and it's great because Ryan's question, I think this goes with the interactive. We would buy fruit. Why not? This was a market. This market, and I believe the next picture, um, yeah, it was in one of the poorer parts of Baghdad. So I think that was right by there. But I took that picture because I think that it's important to show that even during the chaos of war, life goes on. I mean, the market was full. We were buying some. The American dollar there it did get us a lot. I will tell you that.
And
We didn't take advantage of them, but they're like, "Here, take some fruit."
and would you say that you had a positive feeling dealing with civilians for the most part, in circumstances like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And maybe I'm different than other people that fought there. Okay. Maybe I don't I tried to read as much as I can and learn as much as I can about Baghdad and the people of Iraq before we went there.
And that was another question that I had noted to myself a couple of moments ago. Would you say, Mark, that you guys got any kind of I don't know what you would call it, like cultural sensitivity training or religious training? Did they teach you, about the
Yeah,
context of
yeah, they
people?
did. A lot of Baghdad was unique, I feel like, because I don't know if you could call it that now, but in my opinion, for centuries it was a world city. So it really was not a clash, a cornucopia. I don't. There were multiple cultures there, and maybe, for example, if you go to West Virginia, the culture's going to be a little bit different than it might be in, say, Philadelphia. Philadelphia has a more diverse feeling to it. It's so we did have some, yeah, and I think that it was enough. But when you get there, and they in some cases they told you a thumb up is a middle finger, but all the kids and people of a certain age with big smiles, I don't think they were, you know what I mean? I don't think they were giving us the middle. I think they were saying, okay, you just gave us candy. All right. So those are the small minor things. The major ones, for example, they told us, well, Americans weren't allowed to drink alcohol. Okay, I get that. I completely get that. Super Bowl Sunday, we were allowed, those that weren't on patrol. But alcohol was common in Baghdad. They told us it wasn't. I'm like, man, who wrote this book? And again, I think most people are just people.
Good point. Thank you for that. And everybody, you can see just over Mark's right shoulder, one of the courses he teaches is human geography. He and I were chatting about that in the opening moments, and I imagine your time serving overseas and just what you saw really must affect the way you teach classes like human geography.
It does. It does. I just feel that it's so important to understand other people and other ideas and other things. You can have your own, that's fine. But I mean, particularly our country, I mean, we're very, very diverse. We're very, you know, we're just unique, I guess. But it just helps me understanding other people, other cultures.
Let me bring your slides back up, and we're
Sure.
moving it into the last few here. And I thought these are important ones for the students to see and for you to talk about.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have looked it up. I'm not sure if your Memorial Day coincides with ours, but ours is in 2 weeks. Um, and this is one of the somber, important things that I think that people may not understand, but honoring the dead soldiers, not so much honoring war. A lot of people think that this is honoring war. It's not. It's honoring an individual that decided to lay down his life ultimately not for his country, but for me and for the people that we were fighting next to. And I think that we get lost in this message where we don't fully understand unless you've gone through it that we're fighting for each other. I always say it down here, there's an expression, mom, dad, American, mom, dad, apple pie, America, mom, dad, whatever, however you want to say it. But when those bullets start flying, it doesn't matter who the president is. It doesn't matter what your political beliefs in. It doesn't matter what the person's preferences are next to you. As long as you can competently rely on each other, none of that matters. And this is what happens. Yes, that's Clarence Adams.
So that's the man you were speaking about earlier.
Yes.
And I'm sure you went to more than one service like this, Mark.
Yes.
Do they play out the same way, or are they done sort of individually? I'm just curious how the military handles
They
this.
so 99% of the service is going to be the same. However, they do permit people to speak about the fallen. So that's where it differs from person to person if you're comfortable enough to do that. Yeah, we've been to. He was 28 when he passed away, but there were kids as young as 18 that passed away. Well, 19. So there was quite an age difference, and you know we had quite a few in comparison to other units, and other units had more than us. So, but again, the big message is they fight for each other. I mean, we fought for each other, and that's the people within the battalion that had passed away. Um, yeah, you have William Strange on the left, Jeremy Drexler, Erwin Carradine, Joshua Bunch, and Clarence Adams on the right. And a matter of fact, I have Sunday I'll put it up for the week. I have that banner and I'm hanging on my fence at home so people know that. And again, it's not glorifying war. It's not meant to glorify war. It's meant to, this is what people are willing to do. And it's humbling that I got to know them. And, not many people get to meet their heroes, and I got to serve with mine.
That's well said. And in that regard, the other Ryan had a question that he wanted to ask. So Ryan, if you could go ahead and ask number 9, please.
When was it to return home? Was it difficult transition?
You got a lot of feedback there, Ryan.
I'll repeat that for you, Mark. We just had a little bit of Wi-Fi there. So Ryan was just asking, what was it like for you to return home? And what was it like to, get back to normal life, so to speak?
Returning home was great. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to a desert per se, but when you live in a desert for an extended period of time, in our topography and terrain's pretty similar, I would imagine, Pennsylvania and where you are. I remember coming home in March and nothing was really bloomed yet. Some of the trees, but probably in the middle of April, May, like I just remember everything being so green. My eyes physically, without exaggeration, hurt. Everything was green because I was so used to seeing dull orange, brown, whatever color you want to call it. So coming back, I had a lot of money in my pocket and I had a lot of free time. And that is two not really good things. And I'll just leave it at that. So I came home for a month. I was not really well adjusted. Again, we'll leave it at that. And then on April 30th, 2005, I met the woman that saved my life, I say. I met my wife. My brother was home on leave. We were at a Pittsburgh Pirate baseball game, and she was dumb enough to agree to go out on a date with me. And after that, but part of the thing after that, significant others change their priorities. We'll just leave it at that. We ended up getting married 3 years later, and now we have 2 beautiful children, and she's a saint. Believe me, she is just a saint. But one of the hardest things from coming home was, it was hard for me to understand that people didn't understand what I went through. And I don't know if I was embittered at the time. Looking back now, this is what, almost 20 years ago. I'm happy that they didn't have to go through what I did, and I should have embraced that. But I think part of that is that we still had men and women over there. So for me to accept the fact that they were not really paying attention, it was very, very hard. So, and what was different with the reservist, I'm going to use an expression, a sports expression. So we came home and we demobilized, and they patted us on the butt and said, "Good game," and we all went our different ways. And I don't think that they were really ready for that. They weren't ready for decompression. We were there at the demobilization site less than 5 days after coming home from well, we were Kuwait for a week, I think. So I don't think they were ready for that, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready. I wish that they would have mandated us to stay somewhere for a month and talk to people. We are in this we're in this well, particularly the military or football team, or we're in this very macho culture that, oh, I'm tough, I could handle it. No. And this goes for anybody on here. If you need to talk to somebody, because I mean, we all have trauma and we've all experienced trauma in different ways, and people process trauma differently. And to talk to somebody and they give you coping skills and you figure out how to level yourself out, it's just a much, much better place. Because I can tell you that first 3 weeks, and I have no shame to admit this, I drank way too much. I self-medicated with alcohol, and it was the dumbest thing I could have done. And I lived at home with my mom and dad, and you know, they tried the best they can, but again, thank God. But it took me years to go talk to somebody. So my adjustment was there, but it wasn't perfect. It's still not perfect because I think that that's something that you never fully, I don't want to say recover, but you never fully leave there if you're there.
And I'm curious, Mark, when you did speak to somebody, was it through the VA, the Veterans Administration?
We're lucky that a Vietnam veteran, yes, it was. A Vietnam veteran started something called the Vet Center when he come home, and it was a few years after he had come home. And we have vet centers throughout the United States. So what I had done is, and again, it took a long time. I went and I talked to, and I'm in a veterans group, and I go as much as I can because with my kids, one plays basketball and softball. That's neither here nor there. I'm getting long-winded, but I go as much as I can. But that group, that when I'm there, I'm home. We understand. There's that shared trauma theory. I'm not making a joke, but you and I could probably talk for 10 hours because of our profession, and I think that definitely helps.
I'm sure we would have lots of stories to share. You mentioned demobilization a moment ago. When did you leave the military? And like, how long were you in total?
I was in 9 years. I left the military on February 11th, 2011.
And I mentioned, Mark, to you and to the students, we'd finish at about 12:30, so we'll just go a few more minutes. Charlie had a question she wanted to ask.
Sure.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Hello, sir. Did you keep in touch with any of the men you served with?
I think one of the advantages and one of the reasons why, although my readjustment wasn't as well as I wanted it to be, it was still pretty good, was that we have technology. I'm on Facebook. We're on group chats, which sometimes get out of control. Group text. I'm sure you all do group text. You're like, stop texting. I'm in the middle of something. But yeah, we're on there. We have reunions. We try to get together every couple years. The group that lives around Pittsburgh, we go to a Veterans Day or Memorial Day parade every year. So yeah, we definitely, this right here, I can't tell you how many lives it probably saved, because particularly with military people, because all you do is pick it up. I mean, those guys that come home the guys from Vietnam, God bless them. They come home and everybody went their separate ways. You were lucky if you knew their phone number. You were lucky if you knew their address. But we have that. And yeah, the technology helps with our relationships immensely.
And I'll ask, Elena has a question she wants to ask in a moment. I'll ask one based on what you just said there. Technology keeping in touch. When you were in Iraq, on the battlefield and base, were you able to keep in touch with your parents, your brother, friends
Oh
back
yeah,
home?
that's a really good question. Absolutely. We had it was great. It was absolutely great. Email. Here's how I'm dating myself. AOL. We had AOL. And then we had phones. We had phone cards and they had phone trailers. That was unique. Saw quite a few scuffles there. You're taking too long. And guys were just stressed out. You know, some fights occurred out there. Good times.
Interesting to think about that. We've talked to vets, Mark, from from Vietnam, from World War II, from all kinds of different conflicts, and it's just interesting to see how they kept in touch. Now,
Things were a lot different. That when my dad came home from Vietnam, he had forgotten his phone number because you had to say where you were from and then a number, and then they called it the exchange, which I think is your last four of your phone number. And he had forgotten that. But the way he tells it is that the operator had a son in Vietnam, and she's like, I'm not getting off the phone until we find this out. And she was able to do that, which he's been forever grateful for that.
and let me ask you, before Elena comes on, did you and your father, do you guys ever trade stories or, share info with one another about your time on the battlefield?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it took a while, but yep. My brother and I more so, but
Okay. Now, Elena, why don't you go ahead?
When you were in Iraq, what kind of recreation or entertainment did they have for you?
well, I got to see my wife was insanely jealous because we went to Las Vegas. I got to see Wayne Newton and Toby Keith and Rob Schneider and Robin Williams, but mostly we just worked out and lifted weights.
Okay, so you guys weren't in an area where you had like an overseas tour come and visit you in Iraq or anything?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. We did. Yeah, that's Toby Keith, Wayne Newton. Yeah, they all came over. It was pretty impressive. One of my buddies was able to do security with them, which was kind of cool.
All right, I was sorry, I misunderstood you there. I thought I understood that you were in Las Vegas seeing some of them, but
No, we were, and the tickets were so expensive. And she's like, I said, I'm not paying that. I saw him.
okay.
Yes, Rick, USO show.
And I'll ask the
That-
students. The students, give us a thumbs up if any of you know who Wayne Newton is. Okay, that's
Oh,
about
we're definitely dating ourselves again.
okay. Between that and AOL, I think we have a sense. All we need is for you to mention MySpace, and they'll have an idea who we are. So that was fantastic, Mark. And I got to say, your students, if they have been incredibly well behaved. So thank you to them for letting you do this.
Well, thank you.